both someone who's been in combat and someone who's been in the classroom. And I think a lot of people have neither of those perspectives and are just sort of thinking blindly about how we can deal with these situations. So I'm very grateful to you to that you're sharing that your perspective with us and that we can sort of think about other solutions and be more creative about ways that we can help protect kids.
Welcome back. Tonight we have with us Michael DeVito, who's running for Congress for the 11th District in New York. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks to both of you for having me on and for doing this to raise awareness and to keep this conversation going until we get things happening in DC.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you. Thank you for coming on. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your service and how you came to be running for Congress?
Sure. Well, it starts with me never expecting to be running for Congress. One of the last things that I ever thought that I would do is take up the mantle to run for office. So I am a Staten Islander. Originally, I was born in Borough Park and have lived on Staten Island for 3/4 of my life. The only time that I didn't live here was when I was in the Marine Corps. So I enlisted in the Marines when I was 17 years old and felt like it was the best thing for me at the time. Didn't feel like I was going to really get anywhere here in Staten Island. And it's incredible because the kids that I serve now in our community, in the work that I do now, which is essentially helping young people get re-engaged in their education and then getting them on into the workforce, have the exact same feeling. They don't really feel like there's good quality jobs here for them. So my military service was 8 years long. I was initially at Headquarters Marine Corps in Washington, D.C., and then I went overseas to Okinawa, Japan, where I spent about 5 years in the military and then about 7 years living in Okinawa. And I'm sure you guys know, as you're doing your research about how other countries deal with weapons and guns, they have some pretty strict regulations over in Asia and particularly in Japan. So I decided to run for Congress just after the November election last year. And for me, it was realizing that I had been doing really focused work helping young people. I believe that help a kid is to help an entire family. And my mission for a really long time has been to be a helper. And that laser focus kept me from paying attention to what was happening in the country. And I feel like I suddenly looked up and everything was just completely crazy. There was this crazy election going on, and there were all of these, divisive tactics that were keeping people just angry at each other. And I feel like the kind of guy that I am, the kind of commitment that I have to my community and the people that I helped up to this point, they just need somebody like me, an everyday guy who gets up and goes to work to help people. Just an everyday guy doing everyday things with extraordinary energy down in DC representing them. So that's how you find me here on the phone with you right now.
You mentioned that you lived in Japan and that they have very different gun laws. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the differences that you notice, perhaps just in their laws, but also maybe in their culture as well in Japan?
Oh, sure. Well, the first thing that you'd know, as soon as you go to Asia and you look at a police officers don't carry firearms. So if you even just think about the way, policing occurs in Japan, there's no need for the police to have weapons. And the reason why that is because so few people have guns in Japan. It's not something, they don't have a Second Amendment that allows them to have guns. They have very strict regulations. In order to own a gun, you have to go through a series of steps and several background checks and really have to state your case as to the reason why you're even going to own a gun to begin with. And there are so very few deaths in Japan every year from any sort of gun violence whatsoever.
So, before you joined the military, did you have any experience with guns? Did you grow up with guns?
My dad was a gun owner, and he was in security for a little while, and it was a security position where he had to have a sidearm with him. So there was always until my parents split up, there was always a gun in the house, and I knew that there was a gun in the house, and my dad never took it out, never showed it off. It was just something that he was very responsible in. When he came home at night, he would put it away. And it was just an awareness thing. And he was always very careful to speak about guns, about how important they were to protect you, and at the same time, how very dangerous they were. And I remember that from being a very small kid, like 5, 6 years old. And I didn't actually shoot a rifle until I was in the Marine Corps. So that's like a big, basically my whole entire, young life, I never held a sidearm, never held a handgun or anything like that. And in the Marine Corps, that changed, of course.
This may seem like an odd question, but I've never actually fired a gun. What does it feel like to fire a gun? What's sort of the physical sensation of firing, especially of a rifle?
Depending on the caliber of rifle, I could speak a lot about the M16 and the way the M16 feels. So if you're holding the rifle in your hand correctly and you're using your shoulder to basically brace your body so that when you pull the trigger, the recoil of the weapon doesn't sort of because the rifle could just jump out of your hands if you're not holding it right, or it can recoil back and actually injure you. So there's a particular way that you have to hold the rifle to make sure that it's snugly to your body. So if you're holding the weapon right, depending on whether or not you're kneeling or lying down flat, or if you're sitting or standing, the weapon sort of feels differently when it does recoil. I would say that standing has the most, motion to it. If you're shooting the weapon correctly, then the gun almost sort of feels like it's going off by surprise because of the way that you're supposed to very carefully pull the trigger back. So that's how you're able to take your aim, and as we would say in the military, to take a clean shot is that you're sort of going through these series of steps where you're looking through the viewfinders, you're checking your sight, you're then starting to slowly squeeze the trigger, and then the weapon fires. So it could be, after when you first sort of fire a weapon, it sort of takes your breath away because it is sort of it's a loud sound, even with the right types of ear protection on. So it does sort of feel like a bit shocking. And then the more you practice and the more you begin to get used to the process and the steps, your body just sort of gets used to the sensation.
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of people who are sort of very pro-gun talk about the experience of shooting as being pleasurable, something that they enjoy. And so I've always kind of wondered about that aspect of it.
My personal preference, I'd much rather ride a Harley Davidson motorcycle and have that feeling.
I'll stick with knitting.
Yes, or knitting. Yes, exactly. That sounds like fun also.
You're now very in favor of gun reform. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of reforms that you would like to see in our laws?
Sure. I would like to start by saying that I have a personal experience because I've been affected by gun violence, and one of the reasons why I've been sort of just shaking for the last at least year or more that I've been involved in the political process and really been plugged into how, as a country, we're dealing with this just obscene number of mass shootings, and particularly shootings in school, that for me, it's just enough with the thoughts and prayers. My personal story about gun violence is that a young person that I helped graduate high school, who was a larger-than-life young man, his name was Cesar Sanchez. He graduated in June of 2014. I oversee a series of programs that help young people who have fallen behind get back on track and then sort of propel them forward. So this was such a cool kid who was all about giving back and all about helping people. And he graduated in June, and in September, tragic night of September 24th, he was killed in the housing development where he grew up. And it was just so very unexpected. And it wasn't necessarily random in the sense of that he was just sort of a victim that was just sort of walking along and was killed. There was an interaction between him and another person, and Caesar did his best to sort of defuse and de-escalate the situation. And the gentleman came back with a gun and killed him later on in the day. And this completely took my immediate community, the people that we work with every day, the young people that knew him, the staff and the organization that support this work. It was an incredible trauma. And we moved immediately to start raising awareness around, violence, and particularly gun violence in the streets of Staten Island. And for me to then, a couple of years later, start to take this mantle on and make this decision to run for office, and to recognize how our politics is the reason why we're not reforming our gun laws, because it's being used, in my opinion, it's being used to divide us. There are those who feel that their Second Amendment right just should give them the right to as many guns, as much ammunition as they can afford to buy or afford to keep, and that it's their right to do that. And then on the other side, we have the rest of us, as I feel, who just recognize how we are allowing our kids to be slaughtered almost every day, and that there are some sensible things that we should be doing as a country to protect our children. And so what baffles me, and this is something that I actually challenged the congressman here in District 11 on, is that we can't even pass a bill that allows gun violence to be studied in the country, right? So there's a bill right now in the House Bill 1478. It's the Gun Violence Research Act. So I'm sure if you guys have been studying any of this, you probably realize that like 20 years ago, the CDC was basically, there's legislation that prevents the CDC from studying any of the reasons why this is happening every day. And I'm saying every day, and of course I recognize it's not every day. It's just at this point it feels like it's every single day. We're dealing with this issue, and people are being killed every day, of course, by guns. So to be able to even study it is, for me, like the proof that's in the pudding of how divisive this is, across our politics. I would like to start backwards, right? Because there isn't right now a House bill that bans assault weapons. There's one right now in the Senate Bill 2095 that bans assault weapons, and also Senate Bill 2009 that closes the background loophole. So like things like the fact that you can go to a gun show, and in many states, only a handful of states don't require a background check, that you can go to a gun show, and because the seller is a privately owned business or a private seller, that they can sell you a weapon without checking your background. Mm-hmm. That's absurd. That's completely absurd. So, I think that, and when elected, that's the kind of legislation that I intend to present or co-sponsor if it's been presented. We need to get that AR-15 out of the hands of people that mean to kill our kids and our fellow citizens. There's some sensible things that we should be doing kind of right away, and that would be to immediately reinstate the mental health checks. And I know that there are debates over whether or not that's helpful or not. I believe that it is helpful, and I believe that President Obama believed that it was helpful, and that's why he had instated that executive order. It needs to be reinstated. I also believe that we need to mandate a history of violence check. That if you're the kind of person that is walking around with a weapon and you have all sorts of, different types of violent interactions, or that you've been arrested several times, or you have, any sort of domestic violence accusations, that you should not be able to have a gun. So forgive me if I'm over talking this. I have a lot of very